Y'all see this? Ha! Yes! It's about time. It is about time. The time has finally arrived. Let's get to it. Welcome to the Midwest Sports Hour. My name is Isaiah Bella. Well. I'll start off by saying that. It's been a long time coming, man. It's been a long time coming. I just want to make it clear. How do I get this out of my way? Without a doubt, that's going to be the theme of the podcast today. Okay? Without a doubt, the Michigan Wolverines are your national champions. And they could not have done it in a more spectacular fashion. This was just a wild roller coaster of a season. And I want to start by saying that, I've never felt more validated by a season prediction in my entire life. Okay? Before, I believe, and it's been a long time since we've done the podcast. I've had a lot going on in this past year. It's been very eventful, ups and downs, and everything in between, or whatever. We won't get into it. But my last episode, I talked about how Michigan has a lot of different strengths and weaknesses that have changed since the previous season, since the TCU game. I mentioned that Michigan's defensive line would be their strength, like their clear strength, instead of a big question mark going into the season. Kenneth Grant, Mason Graham, Derek Moore, Braden McGregor, all those guys, they all showed out this season. I said that with an offensive coordinator, a solidified offensive coordinator in Sharon Moore, offense is going to be a bit more consistent. And above everything else, I said that this season would be national championship or bust. The talent is there. The talent was all there. You had a full season of J.J. McCarthy at quarterback, at QB1, a full offseason working with Kirk Campbell and Sharon Moore. You get Blake Corum back. You get Donovan Edwards back. You get an offensive line that is still one of the best in the nation. Drake Nugent transferred there. He's been fantastic. Josh Wallace. We'll talk about Josh Wallace a little bit more later, but he was also a question mark going into the season where he was a transfer out of, what was it? UMass? I think it was UMass. And we didn't know how well he would blend with the defense opposite of Will Johnson. Sandra still in at slot corner. The wide receiver room was the biggest question mark, though, because how are they going to make that work without Ronnie Bell and others? And the answer was just fine. The answer was great. I love the result of what came out of that. So let's talk about it. So obviously you had the 4-game suspension or 3-game suspension to start the season with Jim Harbaugh. After it was just this weird technicality on a recruiting thing. Okay, first of all, they had an investigation going for like 2 years on 2 recruits who visited Ann Arbor just on a regular, like, getting to know the town, and during non-contact period. And Jim Harbaugh decided to meet these kids and treat them out to lunch. That's it. That was the violation. And apparently it was a level, 2 violation or something like that. And he got suspended 3 or 4 games. So in those 3 or 4 games, that he kind of took that as an opportunity to showcase his coaching staff. He'd already said before that their coaching staff is one where every coach could get a coaching job. You know, they worked so hard to put together an NFL caliber team, front to back, top to bottom. You know, I could just name off the list of coaches that have outperformed expectations over the years, starting with Jay Harbaugh, his son, Sharon Moore, Kurt Campbell, Chris Partridge, interesting character. We'll talk about him later. Mike Elston, and others. I'm sure I'm missing. Oh, Jesse Minter. Jesse Minter. What a monster. And so he decided that in his absence, he wasn't going to choose just one coach. If he was, it probably would have been Sharon Moore. But he decided he was going to kind of share the wealth here. And he was going to elect different coaches every game that he was gone. I'm not going to look it up just because it's not really worth it. But they had Sharon Moore coach one game or a half of a game. They had Jesse Minter coach the other half. And then another game, they had, I believe, Jay Harbaugh and Kurt Campbell. And another game, they had somebody else. I can't remember. And Jack Harbaugh was an assistant coach. I'm not real sure where that idea came from. This is one of those just off the dome type things. Like, you know what? If they're gonna do this to me, I'm just gonna go all out this season. Why not throw Jack out there? He hasn't coached in how many years? Who did he coach? I keep thinking San Diego State, but that's literally Jim Harbaugh. He was a coach way back when, and he did a pretty good job. But anyway, that was your first 3 or 4 games, and it was eventful. You could definitely tell where certain people's strengths and weaknesses were. Jesse Minter was probably the most raw head coach out of all of them. Made some interesting decisions mid-game that you thought, okay, this is why he's not a head coach yet. Sharon Moore, I think he was the most consistent, authentic out of any of them. And obviously we'll talk more about him later because he had another opportunity. 3 more opportunities, actually. And Kurt Campbell during, I believe it was the UNLV game. I might be wrong. It was one of those games that he was filling in that the offense that he was calling was creative. It was colorful. Yeah, J.J. McCarthy kind of doing what we all knew he was capable of doing, which was slinging the ball down the field. He's extremely efficient, high-flying, strong arm, and he put up some big numbers in a half. I think he put up 3 or 4 touchdowns. So that was interesting, pretty fun. Obviously, the first part of the season is a pretty weak schedule, as it has been the previous 3 seasons. Bowling Green was kind of an odd one. J.J. McCarthy only threw 4 or 5 touchdowns all season and 4 or 5 interceptions all season. And 3 of those interceptions came against Bowling Green. Bowling Green of all teams. I would have thought that any of his turnovers would have been against Penn State, but he didn't even pass the ball against that team. But regardless, this was it was an interesting start to the year. I'm not sure we've seen anything like that, to be honest with you. And he made his return, and Michigan did what Michigan does. They dominated for the first 7-8 games of the year. But then it came out eventually, and everyone already knows this. I'm not going to go into the details very much, that there were certain coaches on the team who were doing active in-game scouting. Now, why this is such a big deal is because this is kind of like New England Patriots-esque recording, but different. I'm not sure how to explain it because I believe the Patriots did all this during just practices. Well, Michigan, there was a man named Connor Stallions. The man, the myth, the legend, Connor Stallions, who really made a name for himself over the course of the season. And apparently, this guy who was affiliated with the school since, 2017? First of all, he's a super fan of Michigan football. Always been a huge fan of the school. And his dream was to contribute any way that he could for Michigan. And he did, I guess. I guess you could say he did. So he became official with Michigan football in 2021, like on the staff. And during his time with Michigan, out of his own budget, Michigan as a school did not fund anything Connor Stallions did. He was on payroll, but they didn't fund what he decided to do next. He bought tickets to other teams' games and would record the sideline, like the signs that coaches were throwing out there, with his iPhone. And the way that he funded this was he did like vacuum repairs out of his own home. It was just such a bizarre situation. I've never heard anything like this. He was a vacuum repair guy at his house. And so he used that money, which was like he made like $57,000 a year or something like that. And he used that money to go to schools' games and record signs with his phone. It's like a loophole in the system because sign stealing is, I don't know, there's a lot of gray area in there. It's not technically allowed, but it is, because coaches take signs off of like game tape all the time. You know, everyone admitted this throughout the entire season. I'm trying to think of my best examples right now. Matt Rule, I think, mentioned it a few times. Deion Sanders mentioned it a few times. Sonny, what's the guy's name? Sonny Dykes. Yeah, he mentioned that, you know, well, of course, before the Michigan TCU game last season, of course they knew that Michigan was stealing signs. But you know what? I'm going to let him speak for himself.
Look, I mean, coaches talk. I mean, we gossip more than anybody in the world. And, I mean, there's no secrets and no honor among thieves and coaches. And so look, I mean, everybody, you know, my guess is probably a little less than half of college football spends 100 hours a week on signals. It doesn't matter what the coach, if the coach knows the play, it only matters if the players know the play. And so, you know, that the coach has to know it, the coach has to be able to relay it to the players, and then you have to decide at that point, is the juice worth the squeeze? There were plenty of plays in the Michigan game where they knew exactly what we were running. You know, but I can assure you there's been plenty of other plays and games we've run this year where the defense has known exactly what we're running. I mean, it's just kind of the nature of this business sometimes.
Yeah, so they knew. They get it. This is something that happens all the time. And you know, this happens in the pros too. John Harbaugh said it happens in the pros. Obviously, it's perfectly legal in the NFL. Whatever. But they made this huge deal out of it. They didn't know how to go about this in terms of punishment. I believe they found out about this around the Michigan State game. And then the Purdue head coach, the new Purdue head coach, he kind of got a little defensive about it, saying some strange things. He was taking some shots at Jim Harbaugh, that saying that, oh, I knew for a fact that there were a number of our games that they were stealing signs. And then Matt Rule came out and he said, yeah, we lost some games. Obviously, there was one game where someone was actively scouting us. Like, why are we getting so defensive about this? There clearly couldn't have been much of an advantage if you didn't go and speak out about it. Say something. But instead, it came out that when they found out about the sign stealing, there were two head coaches, Ryan Day and Greg Schiano. They kind of compared notes here, and they compiled a document of signs from Michigan football, and they shared it with Jeff Brom when he was at Purdue, in hopes that Purdue would take care of Michigan in the Big Ten championship. And obviously, Purdue got obliterated. But this whole thing started to unravel. It was getting out of hand. Purdue then this season also got destroyed. It was like 49-3 or something. And their interim head coach, I still don't even know the guy's name. I'm sure I'll remember later. Something Waters. And he said, I'm just going to call a spade a spade. Okay. Well, that was about the time that the NCAA had to think of something to, actually go about the situation. How can we make this right for the rest of the season? Lots of people calling for Jim Harbaugh's head. Lots of people saying that Michigan does not belong in the college football playoff, and Jim Harbaugh shouldn't be allowed on the field for the rest of the year or in the Big Ten championship. But it's an ongoing investigation. There's no solidified evidence for anything that shows that this action was actually, flipping games in Michigan's favor. There was no evidence that showed that sign stealing, recording signs on your iPhone, was going to just give you, I don't know what to call it, an unfair advantage. Okay? Because like I said, people steal signs all the time. And as a result, teams change their signs. But for some reason in this case, it's just so much different. So what do? Going into the Penn State game was when they had to make a big decision, because Penn State was a top 10 ranked team at that point. I believe they were the number 10 ranked team actually. They had a contingency plan. They were going to put Sharon Moore in as the active head coach had that been the case, but they filed appeals with Michigan football because they found out that Michigan, while they were on the plane to Pennsylvania, they decided they were going to suspend the head coach for the last 3 games of the season. And it just happened to be the biggest stretch of the year, which is still outrageous, by the way. So, they couldn't get the appeal through, and they dropped everything. Jim Harbaugh and his team, they dropped everything that they were going to do. They said, you know what? We're going to take it how it is. We're going to come up with a plan to keep this flowing. We have momentum going into the Penn State game, but this is a road game against probably the best defense in the nation. We can't afford to have these kinds of distractions take us out of the game. So Jim, he's just going to stay home. He's just going to get comfy on his couch and watch the game, and Sharon Moore is going to take over. Trust your offensive coordinator that he knows what he's doing. And they did. So, this is where the fun began. The Penn State game. This is where everything started to change. Against the best run defense in the nation. And one of the best passing defenses in the nation. J.J. McCarthy started the game pretty sloppy. Okay, there were some passes batted at the line. There was one pass that maybe should have been intercepted, but he got sacked a few times. He just wasn't getting anything going. So immediately they made adjustments. They didn't wait till halftime to do it. McCarthy had only thrown 7 for 8 with 60 yards. I mean, that's not horrible. It's not bad. I don't think he was throwing a bad game. There weren't any questionable decisions that he was making. Obviously, there wasn't anything off target. I mean, he only missed one pass. They could have kept passing the ball if they really wanted to. But that's when Sharon Moore says, no, I'm the head coach. I'm playing my way. And my way is I'm running the freaking ball. That is what they did for the rest of the game. Not joking. Middle of the second quarter, they stopped passing the ball. Just all together. I think they were losing at the half. But man, it just didn't matter. Blake Corum and Donovan Edwards went off. And it just seemed like, and when I say they went off, I mean there was nothing Penn State could have done to stop them in their tracks. That's what I mean. They didn't go off for 200 yards and 2 touchdowns like they did last season. That was crazy. This year, they just said, okay, you know what we're going to do. We know what we're going to do. It doesn't matter. We're just going to keep running it down your throat until you find a way to stop us. And then we'll change things up. And that's what they did. They just kept running the ball. Blake Corum had a spectacular game. Donovan Edwards finally got in the end zone. Didn't do that much this season, but for some reason he just finds ways to be spectacular against Penn State. Penn State gotta hate Donovan Edwards at this point. And they ran the ball, I think it was 32 straight times. Yeah, 32 consecutive times running the ball in the second half. That's insane. That's crazy. And you want to know something? They won by double digits. They won by 2 scores. How is that possible? How is that possible? We heard all year that Drew Aller was a better quarterback than J.J. McCarthy. But he didn't do anything. He was a non-factor. That is what we call a coaching masterclass. Okay? That is one of the most impressive wins of the year. On the plane ride there, you knew you were losing your head coach. So how are you going to beat a top 10 team on the road? Penn State is a really intimidating place to play. I said all year that I think it was a mistake for Penn State not to make that their whiteout game. Historically speaking, Michigan doesn't do very well against the whiteout. This year, they decided to skip it. Okay? Makes no sense to me. That's their biggest advantage, and they just gave it away. We appreciate that. Came out on top of that one. The next week was against Maryland. not their cleanest game in the world. Michigan was winning pretty handily, and then Maryland found their way back into the game. I'll say this: Talia Tagovailoa is a really underrated quarterback. I think he should have stayed there for one more season, but there was this weird thing with his eligibility once he entered the transfer portal. I can't remember what it was, but they said that he couldn't go back for some reason. So I guess there's that. And he had to stay in the NFL draft this year. He'll probably be like a sixth round pick or something like that. But I think there's a lot of talent there and a lot of potential. He's great in the pocket. You know, I can't remember watching a game where I was like, this guy doesn't, he's not a good decision maker, or he's sloppy with the football. He doesn't protect the football. No, he's a lot like his brother in that way. He just, he played for Maryland. That kind of sucks. But anyway, Maryland made that a game. Had a feeling that was going to be a bit of a trap game, especially coming off the high that was the Penn State game. But, they took care of business. The Michigan defense kind of showed what they were made of that game. And they ended up coming out on top of that one. And then obviously you have Ohio State at home. The biggest game of the year. At that point in time, it was the biggest game of my life. Because, besides 2006 and 1997, can you think of any games bigger than that one? I certainly can't think of any regular season games bigger than that one. Two undefeated juggernauts in Michigan and Ohio State. Both teams have so much to prove. Honestly, I can't say definitively which team had more at stake. But if I had to pick one, probably Michigan. I mean, their head coach was gone. They had Sharon Moore filling in. He was doing a pretty good job at that time, but this is Ohio State. This is the biggest game of the year. And Ohio State, Ryan Day had already, he has the whole born on third base allegations. He still hasn't beaten those allegations, by the way. Besides 2019, had not beaten Michigan, and they desperately needed to get this one. If they didn't win on the road at Michigan, they're probably not making the college football playoff. They're not going to the Big Ten championship because Michigan's undefeated. So, and they also have one of the best wide receiver prospects in previous generations in Marvin Harrison Jr. Kind of a big deal. Kyle McCord was really coming into his own, and this was the best defense that they had in a long time, by far. So they had to make it happen. They needed to do something, and I'm not sure how to explain what exactly went down for this game, because it was euphoric in a way. Just how everything panned out. So the game starts with a Will Johnson interception. That was awesome. That was right in front of Marvin Harrison Jr.'s face, by the way. And, everyone had been talking about that matchup all year, was how's Will Johnson going to handle the best wide receiver in the nation? Well, he starts with a pick. Just undercut the pass. Read that like a book. Kyle McCord, I don't really think he knew what was coming on that play. Michigan starts that drive within the 10-yard line, and they get a touchdown out of it. Cool. For the rest of the game, it seemed like it seemed a lot like the previous season, where you need JJ McCarthy to kind of come out of a shell this year, unlike he had been for the rest of the season. Keep in mind, before Penn State, JJ McCarthy had not played in a fourth quarter because Michigan was just annihilating everyone. So this was new. This was new for him. Michigan ran a perfect balance of run versus pass. I thought anyway. They didn't run the ball on every play like everyone kind of expected them to be doing, like the Penn State game. Sharon Moore, I think he showcased exactly who he was as a play caller in this game. You know, the Penn State game was just a total embarrassment for Penn State. You know, the Nittany Lions. How do you explain something like that, where a top 10 defense, the number one rush defense in the nation, couldn't stop the run at all? And that's all Michigan did, was just run the ball. They literally only ran the ball. And they did it so effectively that they won by 2 scores. How do you stop that? So naturally, everyone thought, okay, biggest game of the year, Sharon Moore is going to keep that same formula and just pound the rock. But he didn't. You know, he let JJ McCarthy do what he does best. Donovan Edwards and Blake Corum both got their fair share of the ball. But there was something that happened, tied game at 17-17, I believe, and it was a big moment in the game where Zach Zinter suffered a season-ending injury. Couple commercial breaks to take some time, let him get off the field. And this was a moment described by a lot of people as the moment that really changed the game. The crowd was really into it at that point, but at the same time, you're losing one of the top guards in the nation. You know, how will Michigan respond to that? And they were moving the ball down the field too. So they were driving before this happened. Usually after a big injury, with that kind of momentum, you're thinking, okay, they're going to start off a little slow. This could throw things off a bit. But literally the next play was something that just took the lid off the building. Was when Blake Corum housed it like 35 yards to the left side. And he puts up the 6'5" in the camera. That was brilliant. Brilliant. You could not have timed that more perfectly. I can't stress that enough. That was amazing. The big house exploded after that one. And they didn't settle down one bit. Okay, the next drive, Ohio State is trying to get something going. There's something that happened on this drive that made me get off my seat. Because, and I love when this kind of stuff happens. A ball gets thrown up to Emeka Egbuka, and he's wide open. You know, if he catches this cleanly, if he doesn't have to jump for this ball, he's probably taking it quite a ways down the field. But instead, he does have to jump for the ball, and Quentin Johnson, the safety, I think, in this play, he's like dang near on the opposite end of the field. And he marches to the other sideline so fast to catch up with this ball. As soon as Egbuka gets it in his hands, Johnson is in his chest, like helmet to the chest, and just pops him. Egbuka flipped upside down midair. I don't know if I have the words to describe how I felt after this game. after this play, because usually this kind of thing happens against my teams. And that usually means that we've lost any momentum that we had at that point. This is the opposite. Quentin Johnson destroyed one of the best wide receivers in college football on that play to kind of show you, like, we are not the same Michigan of old. And on this field, we are on a different level. You know, that was like the emphatic, okay, I know we're going to win this game. I knew we were going to win this game. Fast forward a bit. Michigan's doing a pretty good job staying in this game, but Ohio State, you can't hold that offense forever. Marvin Harrison Jr., he gets in the end zone finally later on in the fourth quarter. Makes it a tie game. Marvin, I got to say this. Marvin Harrison is, I might be a Michigan fan, but that doesn't make me a liar. He's my favorite wide receiver for the past 2 seasons. He's been fantastic. I really hope he becomes a Chicago Bear because, Caleb Williams and Marvin Harrison would make my heart happy. That'd make me smile like all season. But you can't he can't have it all, So for now I had to watch him take on Michigan. That wasn't as fun. So he ties the game up. What Michigan would have to do then, or no, he didn't tie the game up. I believe he brought it within 3. And you know what? Let me double check. I believe he tied the game. No, they didn't tie the game. They brought it within 3. But they're in the game now. They've caught back up. There was a 10-point lead. And what Michigan would have to do, they would have to drain 7 minutes of clock, or 8 minutes of clock. There's 8 minutes left in the fourth quarter. Michigan all season long has been very, very good at controlling the game clock. A few people in college football, I believe PJ Fleck and Joel Klatt, described this defense as the boa constrictor, or the team in general, because they get a grip on the momentum and they keep it, and they will, they're going to suffocate you on the field until they get what they want. So this was the biggest, no hyperbole, the biggest drive of the season. Okay? 27-24, what are you going to do? At that point, Michigan would not give up any negative plays for the entire drive. One play after another, they just kept driving down the field. Edwards would go right side. Corum would go left side. Cornelius Johnson made this one catch off a really errant throw from a J.J. McCarthy that made my jaw drop because, again, usually my teams don't come up with those kinds of plays, but he did. Cornelius Johnson is one of the most underrated wide receivers in college, mainly because he's not in an offense that utilizes players of his talent. But he made this catch, and that came down to a 3rd and 1 or 4th and 1 or something, and Michigan would convert just about every time. They managed to get rid of 7 minutes, and they settle for a field goal. I was a little surprised by that one. I didn't expect them to just settle, because they usually don't. That close, they're gonna try and go for the win. They've gone for the win all season. But no, they trust their defense. Their defense had been playing really well all game. So why not? Just give it up to them. 30-24. 56 seconds left. This is where Ohio State had to show that, what they're made of. Kyle McCord needed to have a legacy drive. There were a couple passes in there where it started to look like the Notre Dame game. He was really coming back. Got a couple passes off to Ibuka and Marvin Harrison. There was this one catch by Marvin Harrison that was just ridiculous. Down the left sideline, covered by two people. Didn't matter. 32 seconds left, though, and this is what ended the game, really. Michigan had not gotten much pressure on Kyle McCord all game. But they did finally hear. I believe it was Braden McGregor who got in his face. Jalen Harrell got in his face. Got him underneath the arm. Kyle McCord lets it go, and it goes right into Rod Moore's hands. And that's the game. Rod Moore call game. Just, again, euphoric. How else could you describe a game like that? This was the biggest edition of Michigan versus Ohio State. The biggest edition of the game that we had ever seen. 2 undefeateds. And just like that, Ohio State is out of the mix. They never made their bid for a college football playoff after that one. So, I gotta say, perfect. Bat 1,000 for Sharon Moore after that one. Business as usual. Michigan looked how they had looked all season long. They didn't lose a step on anything. J.J. McCarthy did what he needed to do. Blake Corum was the hero of the game, I believe. Besides that secondary, obviously. And we were moving on to the Big Ten Championship. That was pretty easy. We took care of Iowa. Didn't really need to do anything. I won't really get into that one just because, again, didn't need to do anything. They're the worst offense in college football. Once Michigan scored 3 points, that game was over. So, after actively trying to get rid of the head coach and sabotage the season, it didn't matter. It didn't matter. They're back. They are back in the college football playoff. And oh my gosh. It really felt like this was Michigan's year. There just wasn't anything that anyone could do to stop them. This train was rolling, and it was going to keep rolling until it got to where it needed to be. Okay? 2 years ago, Jim Harbaugh said, we're going to beat Ohio State or die trying. I think he had pretty much the same mindset going into this season was we're going to win it all. This is going to be my last hurrah, and I'm going to do it in style. Okay? After all that talk about sign stealing, after all of the extra allegations to come out of it, we're here. We're in the top 4, and something interesting happens. So obviously, Michigan wins their championship. And Florida State, it looked like Florida State wasn't going to make it in because they lost Jordan Travis and they lost their backup quarterback too. Even though they were still winning games, they were undefeated. They didn't lose any games during the regular season, and they won the ACC championship against Louisville, another very good team. And it still didn't matter. Because somehow, some way, Alabama was able to beat Georgia. And at that point, if Florida State wanted to be in that game, basically they would have had to beat Louisville by 20 or more points. They still won by 2 possessions. But, and I've said this already. We've never in playoff history have seen a team get penalized for not losing. You know, you don't get punished for winning. I don't understand it. You're not going to know how good a team is until they play the games. The games have to matter for something. The results on the field have to matter for something. And for the College Football Playoff Committee, it didn't matter. I will say that, in their bowl game, most of the Florida State players either declared for the draft or they transferred. And at that point, you kind of see like, okay, did you really deserve to go to the playoff? After losing to Georgia like 63-3 or something like that. But speaking of, Georgia, Alabama, they play their SEC championship game. Georgia undefeated. Alabama had lost their one game to Texas. And Georgia loses that game by 3. By 3. And they got left out of the playoff. How that is possible is still beyond me. I don't know how that's, they made this argument all season long of, oh, well, you have to choose the 4 best teams, not the 4 most deserving teams, which I don't know how you can substitute one for the other. But, I mean, Georgia, they played an extra game. TCU last season lost their extra game to Kansas State, and they were still in the playoff. Georgia, as an undefeated team, regular season team, lost to their rival by 3 and got bumped out. So moving Bama up like 6 spots into the number 4 spot. Crazy. I won't say nobody saw that coming. Just about everyone saw that coming. Whether you thought the committee was biased or you thought maybe Alabama's, they just deserve to be there. I don't know. But, they made it in. They squeaked by. They made it to the 4th spot. Michigan was bumped to number 1. Washington was number 2. And Texas was moved into the top 3. So that was your matchup. As if the season could not get any more interesting for Michigan football. Their draw at the number 4 spot was the big bad wolf of the SEC. The biggest championship winning team of my generation, the Alabama Crimson Tide. Nick Saban, are probably the best college football coach in history. An Alabama team that was finding a lot of momentum in the second half of the year. Jalen Milroe was finding his stride as a rushing quarterback. And they were playing with momentum on their side. They've been here before. And not only that, it's the Rose Bowl. So this, in my opinion, was quite literally the biggest game in Michigan football history. You could make the argument before that game that this is probably the best Michigan team in their history. J.J. McCarthy, in my opinion, is the best quarterback they ever had. Obviously, you mentioned Tom Brady, but Tom Brady was great in the pros. He wasn't fantastic in college. Still made things happen. But McCarthy is the most winningest quarterback. He had the highest win percentage. He only lost 1 game in his college football career. This is, to me, this was the national championship. Because Washington or Texas, I don't see the advantage that either of those teams would have over Michigan that Alabama would. People had been talking all season about, Michigan hasn't played anybody. Just wait until they play the SEC. You can't match that SEC speed. I think they matched it pretty well. Let's just jump right into it. First of all, Michigan sacks the quarterback 7 times. 5 times in the first half, which is crazy. Against Alabama? Bama doesn't give up 7 sacks. And Michigan, as good as this defensive line had been all season, they hadn't really put pressure on the quarterback like that. But they came to play. They were out there to murder Jalen Milroe. And they put as many hits on him as they possibly could. But outside of that, this was a really sloppy game. Super sloppy on both sides. Mainly for Michigan. Michigan, I would argue, played their worst game of the year. Maybe the worst and the best. I don't know. But they started with a near interception. Basically threw it right to the guy, and it was overturned. And then, it didn't matter because it ended in a 4-and-out or a 3-and-out. And then they fumbled the punt return. That went the other way. Alabama ends up scoring first. Just a wild turn of events. You almost thought Michigan was just going to give up the game. Like, oh, what everyone expected. I guess Alabama's just going to take care of business today. But immediately after that, Michigan drives down the field pretty handily. McCarthy makes some wild plays as he's done all year. There was this catch by Khalil Mullings that I did not see coming. The toe drag down the left sideline was really cool to watch because Khalil Mullings is one of those guys who, like, if he does something significant during a game, it's really significant, whether it's through the ground or through the air. And they made it happen here. And at the end of this drive, Blake Corum catches a wide open pass for a touchdown. Don't think Alabama saw that coming. I think they were expecting run the whole way. So that happened. Eventually, after some more sacks, Michigan gets the ball back. J.J. McCarthy, this was my favorite play of the... Well, actually, no. I changed my mind. This wasn't my favorite play of the game, but it was one of them. Where they did this interesting flea flicker type deal. Donovan Edwards catches the ball on the right side, and then they think he's going to throw it down the field. He doesn't. He turns around and throws a really high pass at J.J. McCarthy. Somehow, McCarthy comes down with it one-handed, facing the opposite direction. He turns around and just launches this football. Okay? For just right where it needed to be to land in Roman Wilson's hands. But he gets clobbered on the way down. He lifted off his feet to throw this, and the defender drove his face into the turf. And there was all this turf in his face mask, and he had to get it out. Like, this was beautiful. That was in my opinion, this was the best play in J.J. McCarthy's career. There aren't many quarterbacks in college football who can make that pass. There just aren't. Okay? And McCarthy does this on a weekly basis. Does things that make your eyes pop, both with his athleticism and his elite arm talent. Yes, I'm calling it elite arm talent. Okay? McCarthy is that kind of dude. But anyway, after that play, there's a little slant to Tyler Morris. We talked about, they can't keep up with this SEC speed. Well, Tyler Morris took the top off that defense. He was blazing the field. Haven't seen a Michigan wide receiver run that fast in some time besides Samaj Morgan. And he took it to the house, up 14-7. And this is where things start to get interesting for the other side. Because, they missed the extra point. That proved to be significant. And Michigan started to get sloppy again. Passes were going through players' hands. They were making questionable decisions, and Alabama adjusted. Okay, they started getting Jalen Milroe running up the middle of the field. He was doing a really good job of it. He was gashing the defense, and eventually they get in the end zone again. They make it a one possession game. Again, other side of the ball. Couldn't make things happen with the wide receivers. There's drops all over the place. They have to punt it away. And this became kind of this back and forth defensive battle. Michigan was not staying in this quite how they wanted to. I will say it was significant that they were able to hold Alabama to a field goal later on. They were up 4, and they instead of making this game out of reach, they go up 7. There's 4 minutes left. It's 4th down and 1, or 4th down and 2. This is where Michigan had to make the biggest play of the year. Okay, this was for all the marbles. If they don't get this 4th down, it's over. And this is way in their own territory too. So I was a little surprised that they weren't going to punt it away, trust their defense, and use their timeouts. They wanted to go for the win. This was some Dan Campbell type of stuff, and I greatly appreciated it. They drew up a play where, again, I don't really think Alabama was expecting them to pass the ball. I think they were expecting run because they'd been doing it well all game. They'd been doing it well all season. Instead, they get Blake Corum off to the right side for a pass, and he's wide open. So much green grass in front of him. I thought the game was over. I was mentally preparing myself to just go home after that play. Instead, I'm like, oh, thank you, Blake Corum. Thank you, Jim Harbaugh, for making that play happen. And so he gets down the sideline. There's a flag on the play, but it was during the play, blocking the back, so it's a 1st down. And then the play after that, something else amazing happens. They run J.J. McCarthy. Finally. Where was this all game long? They run J.J. McCarthy. He gets the 1st down. And then, looking to the right side, he finds Roman Wilson on a tipped pass. Roman Wilson makes the biggest catch of his career. After the tip pass, Bama was not expecting him to catch that. They were going for the interception. He made a great athletic play for the ball, caught it, defender flew past him, and Roman Wilson immediately turns and takes off to the left side. He's really good at making decisions on the fly. Roman Wilson's one of the most dependable wide receivers in college. And then, immediately after that, Roman Wilson gets, Sherrone Moore gets a little tricky on this one. Wide open Roman Wilson, short touchdown pass, and we got a tie game. Whoo! I didn't see that coming. I didn't see this kind of game coming. I've said this a few times already, and I'll say it again. My teams don't come out on top in games like that. My teams don't make good decisions. My teams don't fight back. Since when? Since when are the Michigan Wolverines able to go toe-to-toe with Goliath of college football? The Crimson Tide were against the wall at this point. They had to get some 1st downs. They didn't get it. They punted away. Jake Thaw, I feel bad for the guy because he caught a lot of heat for this, but he muffed the punt very smartly, did not fold under pressure. He recovered the fumble at the 1-yard line. Perfect. That's just how we want it. And we go to overtime. Now, what I will say to quickly go into summary of this overtime is probably the greatest sequence that Michigan has ever had. Because you couldn't have scripted this any better. Michigan gets the ball first. All they needed was 2 plays to get in the end zone. And guess what they were? Run right to Blake Corum, get a few yards. Run left to Blake Corum, he goes all the way. I get goosebumps thinking about that play. Just you know what? Let's watch it together. It's also one of my favorite calls that I've ever heard from Chris Fowler. Chills, goosebumps everywhere. I'm sweating, I'm pacing. I don't know what to think. I don't know what to feel. Are we really going to the national championship? You know, at this point, is this really happening? I don't know. Like, this can't be real. And it turned out it was. Jalen Milroe trying to make things happen. He got sacked once by Mason Graham. Got a pass off to the right. Josh Wallace stood him up at the 3-yard line. Huge play for Josh Wallace, who is having a fantastic game. He already forced a fumble on the guy, and now he stifles him a few yards short of the goal line. And now, this is the moment we've all been waiting for. No timeouts left. Jalen Milroe, does he keep Bama's season alive? And what happens? They do a quarterback draw on a bad snap. Tries to run up the middle. Josiah Stewart blows up the right tackle and makes the tackle bump into Jalen Milroe's leg, and he gets stuffed up the middle. Another fantastic call from Chris Fowler. And just like that, Michigan has taken down the beast in Alabama, and they're going to the national championship. Wow. After all that talk of, oh, Michigan looks scared now. They're scared. They don't want to play Alabama. Just wait till you have to face the SEC. Business as usual. There was only one team that wanted it that day. The Michigan Wolverines were going to come out on top one way or another, and they did. Okay, they made it happen. J.J. McCarthy finishes the game with 3 touchdown passes. Blake Corum finishes the game with 2 total touchdowns. The defense had 7 sacks, and we got Washington. Washington took care of business against Texas. Obviously there was the sequence at the end of that game where Texas almost came back. They almost came back after an injury timeout and marched down the field and took the lead. They didn't. We got Washington. Washington was the best offense in college football, bar none. So this was, this was for the Michigan's defense, the biggest test of the year. Again, there's a player on Washington's team that I want on the Bears so badly in Rome Odunze. He's so good. For me, Marvin Harrison is 1, and Odunze is a very close number 2. You pair that with the fact that Mike Penix Jr. already has experience playing Michigan. Beat Michigan the last time they played them during COVID. So, I mean, there's that element of like, could we Could we have this moment spoiled for us? It didn't take very long to realize that Michigan came here to handle business the way they have all season long. They came here to win, and they were going to do it one way or another. Donovan Edwards, just a round of applause for Donovan Edwards for the game that he had. Starting off, he had 2 rushes for 2 touchdowns, one on the left side and one on the right side. And this is the Donovan Edwards that Michigan fans are used to seeing. He is a great running back. One of my cold takes on the season was that someone on Michigan football was going to win the Heisman Trophy. The Heisman race ended with Corum being number 9 and McCarthy being number 10. Oh well, I thought Donovan Edwards was actually going to be somewhere near the top of the list. It turned out he had some mental things that he had to get together throughout the year. He had to talk to a therapist, and just to kind of get his mind right, just to kind of bring him back down to earth a little bit. And he popped off at just the right time. Was destroying Washington's defense, just eating them alive. And, after those 2 touchdowns, Blake Corum pops off this big run. That one ends in a field goal. And Washington, they tried their best. They tried their best to stay in this game. They did get the 1 touchdown to number 11. Can't remember his name. And you thought maybe Washington would keep this a game. But again, Michigan's defensive line made this an absolute nightmare for Mike Penix. After the game, you could see Mike Penix kind of limping off the field. He looked like he just got out of a world war or something. I have never seen Michigan affect a college quarterback like that. Ever. Okay? He went through it. Kenneth Grant, Mason Graham were absolute nightmares for him. Mike Sanders was an absolute nightmare for him. Just couldn't get anything going. He was overthrowing Odunze. The offensive line was making some mental errors, mental mistakes. There was one play where Odunze caught it and it ended up coming back. And, two score game. We're in the 4th quarter. Not much is really going on since the 2nd quarter. But finally, Washington's making their way down the field. So this is their chance. If they want to make this a game, this is their chance to get back in this. And what happens next was the nail in the coffin. Penix, pressure in his face. He kind of freaked out. Made a read on the right side. Nobody is open. Nobody's open. And the ball lands right in Mike Sanders' chest. And he takes it almost to the house. He took it all the way to about the 6 or 7 yard line. You knew what was going to happen after that. You knew it. You knew it. We knew it. They knew it. What's going to happen? Michigan's going to run the ball. And this game is over. Okay? Blake Corum gets the ball to the right side, shakes a defender, makes him fly to another area code, and he takes off in the end zone. And you can probably guess what happens after that. That's game. That's game. Michigan wins this one 34-13. And they, your Michigan Wolverines, are your national champions. Yes. Yes. Oh my gosh, I could write a book about about all the emotions, about what this season means for Michigan as a school and the fans in general. I can speak from experience. When I started watching football, it was well past Michigan's glory days. I had known nothing but losing to Ohio State. That was it. Tate Forcier, even Denard, he had the one win against Ohio State, but that was about it. Devin Gardner, Jake Rudock, Wilton Spate, Shea Patterson, all these other guys, they never got it going. Michigan was always undersized. They weren't tough enough. They weren't fast enough. Everyone else was leagues ahead, light years ahead of Michigan football. Even though it looked like they had the talent on paper, they didn't. They weren't even close to these guys. And finally, Michigan, Jim Harbaugh, he changes his philosophy on both sides of the ball. Makes the proper coaching changes, makes the proper schematic changes, and they fought tooth and nail to make it to the level of production to where they can say, this is a team that knows how to win, and they are going to win. And they made it happen. Okay, they made it happen. They brought the national championship back to Ann Arbor. But the best part, that's not even the best part of it. The best part of the entire season, after everything they've been through, after all of the scrutiny, everyone saying one game after another, they're going to lose, they're going to lose, they're going to lose. Pat McAfee was like just an L factory for how many predictions he got wrong against Michigan. After all of that, and the allegations and the suspensions, something amazing happens. Something just the cherry on top. The NCAA releases a statement. So the president of the NCAA, Charlie Baker, the one who's handing out these suspensions and sanctions and whatever that everyone's waiting for. He comes out and he says, we had good reason for, bringing evidence to light and saying, okay, maybe this is a concern. We don't know entirely if this is strongly affecting games, but we know that they're doing it to an extent that we can't ignore. So we have to do something. And then he says something that I will never live down. I will never live down this quote. He says, and I quote, "Nobody can say Michigan didn't win the national championship fair and square." Fair and square. You heard it. You heard it from the man himself who oversees this entire thing. If there are any sanctions, he's the one who's putting it down. Okay? The person that all of these fans are begging and pleading to not let Michigan take part in the college football playoff and take away all of their wins. This is the person that you're complaining to. Please, Charlie Baker, do something. And he says, no. Michigan football is not good because they are cheating. They are just that good at football. And that's why they made it to the mountaintop. That's not a quote, but that's essentially what he is saying. You can't make this up. It doesn't get better than this. That is the biggest win of the year. You can take that quote and shove it in everyone else's faces and say, you see this? Your team lost to Michigan because Michigan is just better. They're better than your sorry program. Thanks for trying, though. Thanks for trying to derail the entire season and sabotage our championship hopes. It didn't matter what you did. You can take away Jim Harbaugh. You can hope that the loss of Zach Zinter will mean anything. You know, you can pray on J.J. McCarthy's downfall. You can pray that Nick Saban and the Crimson Tide can take care of business and show them what the SEC is really about, that it just means more. You can hope and pray that Washington will blow the lid off of Michigan's defense. Finally, they're playing a good offense. One obstacle after another. And Michigan football did what they knew they could do all season. Win football games. That's all they needed to do. And after 9 seasons, Jim Harbaugh finally brings a title to Ann Arbor. I can't say that there is a single Michigan football team that is better than that. There is not a prouder moment in Michigan football history. Not a one. This is a high that I'm going to ride all year. You know, and even though Jim Harbaugh's gone, and we'll talk about the departure of Jim Harbaugh later on in a different episode and what that means for Michigan. He did exactly what he came here to do. You know, maybe people thought he should have done more. I don't. I certainly don't. I'd never once in my lifetime thought that Michigan would even be in this position. You know, we lost to Toledo at one point, for Pete's sake. You know, Toledo. We almost lost to the Akron Zips at one point. And at those moments, I was like, we're never beating Ohio State. We're never beating Michigan State again. We're never making it on top of the Michigan football world. And look where we are. We did. You can't take that away from us. You can't take that away from us. The best Michigan football team of all time, J.J. McCarthy, the greatest Michigan football quarterback of all time, Blake Corum, the best Michigan football running back of all time, and he doesn't just have legacy behind him. He has the stats to prove it too. And, you know, as far as Jim Harbaugh's legacy goes, this is his legacy. This team, Team 144. That is, that's the exclamation point that, you know, any coach would ask for a season like that. Just against all odds, backs against the wall, you do what you do best. And that's who you are. You know, no sign stealing was going to change that. You got to beat them on the field. And they did. I'm so glad that I'm able to come onto this podcast and, you know, and talk about this kind of thing. It's not something I would have ever imagined in my entire lifetime. And it's a nice change, you know. Michigan football is your national champions until further notice. And next season, they have an entire gauntlet ahead of them. We'll talk about that next episode, or the next time we talk about Michigan football, probably be next week or the week after. They got a new head coach. We'll talk about him too. He's got a lot of changes to make. Harbaugh's gone. Harbaugh has taken his next steps in life, and we all wish him luck. But for now, we're enjoying the throne. We're enjoying the throne for now. And that's going to do it for this episode. Thank you for staying with me. Hopefully later on we'll be able to talk more about the success of Michigan football and the way this culture, this championship culture, has stayed in place and they've made their way to more titles. Only time will tell. Only time will tell. But for now, that's going to be it for this episode. Next episode, we got to talk Chicago Bears, baby. We got to talk Bears. They got the number 1 pick again. Thank you to the Carolina Panthers. We'll do a quick recap of that season. And we'll talk about Justin Fields and what we think they plan to do. Hopefully that episode will release later this week. Until then, I'm your host, Isaiah Bella. Thank you for joining me on the Midwest Sports Hour podcast. I appreciate you. See you next time. Peace.